What Kelsey Mitchell said in the locker room after Indiana's third straight win left her teammates buzzing. The Fever had just knocked off the Lynx without 5 key players, including Clark herself. Yet instead of leaning into excuses, Mitchell delivered a message that cut through the noise. "You've seen our growth," she told them. 4 simple words, but they captured everything about what this team had become. Not underdogs clawing to survive. Not placeholders waiting for their star to return. Contenders. Contenders rewriting their own story in 2025. For anyone watching from the outside, the scene made little sense. How could a team missing 5 rotation players possibly string together wins against playoff-caliber opponents? Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Sydney Coulson, Khloe Bby, Aari McDonald, all sidelined. That's nearly half the roster, including the face of the league. For most franchises, such a wave of injuries is the death knell. Seasons crumble under that kind of weight. Dreams dissolve into what-if conversations. And just a couple of weeks ago, it looked like Indiana's year would go the same way. They had lost 4 of their previous 5 games. Their playoff hopes seemed like sand slipping through their fingers. Fans whispered if the Fever even had enough bodies to compete, let alone win. But something inside this group refused to die. Stephanie White, calm in the storm, delivered a mantra. Be where your feet are. On the surface, it was simple. Don't worry about who's missing. Don't drown in what you can't control. Focus on the possessions in front of you, on the players in uniform, on the opportunity to fight. But the phrase became more than words. It was a culture, a way of life. And when the Fever embraced it, the transformation began. The Minnesota game became the clearest example. That opening 10-0 run wasn't luck, it was intent. Indiana set the tempo and forced the Lynx to play their game. The Fever's defense pressed up, swarming passing lanes, contesting every shot, diving across the hardwood for loose balls. Offensively, the ball swung with purpose, driven by players who understood that every possession was a chance to prove something. Veterans muscled for rebounds. Reserves sacrificed their bodies. Energy became the strategy. It wasn't about clean execution. It was about relentlessness. And for the first time in a long time, the Fever weren't just trying to keep up. They were dictating everything. By the end, the box score read like a testament to their resilience. 5 players in double figures, a balanced attack that spoke louder than any single star could. It wasn't just one person carrying the weight. It was everyone locked into the same fight. That's when the Fever stopped being a team surviving injuries and started being a team built on identity. Response, not circumstance, defined them now. At the center of it all was Kelsey Mitchell. Her season had already reached historic territory, averaging over 20 points per game, the first player in franchise history to do so. She became the offensive heartbeat, refusing to let Indiana slip quietly into the shadows. With Clark gone, defenses keyed on her with double teams and traps. Yet Mitchell adjusted, learned patience, balanced scoring with playmaking. She wasn't just piling up numbers. She was leading. And that leadership gave the players around her the confidence to thrive. After beating Minnesota, she didn't talk about her own points. She looked at her teammates and said, "You've seen our growth." That's why the words landed like thunder. Because they weren't about her. They were about everyone. Aaliyah Boston carried the front court like only she can. No longer just the anchor in the paint, she orchestrated offense like a guard in a center's frame. On one play, she stole the ball, raced coast to coast, and finished through contact, sending the Fever bench into a frenzy. On another, she forced doubles, calmly kicking to shooters who buried open looks. She tied her own rebounding record, controlling the glass with a quiet dominance that spoke volumes. Every time Minnesota shifted toward her, Indiana punished them elsewhere. Boston had become more than a star. She was the pivot around which everything turned. Odyssey Sims, signed mid-season, looked reborn. Coming off the bench, she delivered 15 points, controlled the pace, and brought a steadying presence the Fever desperately needed. When the game tilted in the Lynx's favor, Sims slowed possessions, ran the offense, and reminded the league she still had plenty left to give. Afterward, she summed up her mindset with a line that felt tailor-made for the Fever's journey. New season starts Sunday. It wasn't just talk. It was a declaration of how Indiana intended to play moving forward. Aerial Powers added her own exclamation point. Back-to-back threes in the second half that silenced the Lynx rally and stretched the Fever's lead. Those shots weren't just points. They were daggers. They carried the swagger of a player who refused to hesitate, even in the tightest moments. The timing was everything. When Minnesota threatened to steal momentum, Powers ripped it back with a flick of her wrist. The bench erupted. The crowd roared, and the Fever built breathing room they never surrendered. Lexi Hull's contributions went beyond the box score. She hounded guards on the perimeter, switched on to bigger forwards without flinching, and still found ways to finish around the rim. Her defense became a backbone, her hustle an engine. She embodied the "be where your feet are" mantra as much as anyone. Natasha Howard rounded out the effort, stretching the floor, battling inside, and giving Boston a partner to balance the front court load. Together, they stabilized Indiana in ways that don't always make highlights but win games. Through all of it, Clark remained visible. She didn't disappear after her injury. She sat on the bench clapping, cheering, leaning into huddles and pointing out adjustments. Even in street clothes, her presence elevated the team. And when Powers' threes fell or Sims sliced into the paint, the camera caught her grinning, living every possession with her teammates. Her return next season promises a team that won't just lean on her brilliance, but surround it with playoff-tested toughness. The Fever's resurgence wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to crumble. Instead, they earned their first winning record since 2015, a milestone that speaks to more than standings. It's a sign that the culture has shifted, that this is no longer a franchise content to survive. They are building to contend, and Mitchell's locker room words gave voice to the transformation. "You've seen our growth. Growth through injuries. Growth through doubt. Growth through nights where the scoreboard said it should have been over, but it wasn't. They kept rising. Now comes the question that lingers over the league. What happens when a team that was built for the future starts proving it belongs now? What happens when resilience becomes identity, when response becomes culture, when players like Mitchell, Boston, Sims, Powers, and Hull no longer surprise anyone but instead demand respect? The Fever's rise is no longer a story of survival. It's a preview of a team that might be ready to crash the Contenders table sooner than anyone expected. The playoffs loom. The stage is bigger, the lights brighter, the pressure heavier, but Indiana isn't shrinking from the challenge. They've already been tested in ways most teams never face. And instead of breaking, they've forged a foundation. A foundation that Clark will return to. A foundation that White has cultivated. A foundation that Mitchell has put her voice behind. The Fever aren't finished. They're only getting started. So now the challenge shifts. Can Indiana turn resilience into dominance when the stakes rise again? Can they carry this balance, this unity, into a playoff run that cements their rebirth? That's the story still to be written. And that's why Mitchell's words matter so much. Because they aren't about what has already been accomplished. They're about what's coming next. What do you think? Are the Fever a real threat in these playoffs, even without Caitlin Clark on the floor? And when she returns next season, will this group already have the DNA of champions?